My position was electrician. I worked on third shift. I was hard on in 1969. I got out of the Navy and happened to stop by the Tipple with my cousin. He was applying for a truck driving job, and I started talking. I think it was Jerry Grant, and he asked me what I was doing and stuff. And he said, "Well, I was an electrician." And he said, "Well, you might want to interview." So we're starting to look for electricians. And that's when they was getting the Empire mine ready to go. And I said, "Well, I'm still in the Navy." He said, "When you get out?" And I said, "Oh, it's about 3 or 4 months." He said, "Come back." And I did. And Oscar Bays, he interviewed me and he hired me. He said, "It's not going to be as nice and clean as you had it in the Navy." And I asked him, I said, "Well, you don't have anything down there that won't wash off, do you?" He said, "No, I don't guess we do." There was no typical day at a coal mine. But if the machines was coming up for a cable change, this had 2 big trail cables on it, 1,800 feet. And it'd be running on one as it went down the pit. And as you got up to about, 1,600 feet, the electricians was responsible for keeping power to all the machines. We also had a 1250 drag line that was running. It was about a 65-yard machine, I think. And we had to keep power to them. They was running, we brought 69,000 into our substations. We stepped it down to 7,200 volts. And it's what came aboard the machines was 7,200. And this machine had 2 3,500 horsepower synchronous motors that turned the generators. Cable changes, routine maintenance. Every one of those motors and brushes is DC, direct current. And it was generated there by those 2 synchronous motors. If you look in here, you can see the handles. That was your crowd and hoist, and then your swing was left and right down there on your pedals. And the operators they were good. They really were good at what they did. They was a camaraderie that's, I'd say, unusual and outstanding in the mining field. I was fortunate to be one of the ones that really came up on the machine on a regular basis and got to talk to the crews. Every job out here was dangerous. Electricians more so because we dealt with high voltage, the 69,000. We were responsible for the power coming into our distribution substations. Each machine had its own substation, the 1250 drag line, the 1850 or big Brutus, and the Tipple. The Tipple was a whole other ball of wax because that's where the coal went. And it was like a big washing machine. They literally washed the coal. They crushed it, they took it in, they washed it, they got the clays out of it, they got the shale out of it, and then they went ahead and put it in coal cars. Katie hauled about 100 cars a day out of here. This was a real good producing mine. Working at the coal mine, it's probably one of the few places you could stand in water up to your hips of mud and get dust in your eyes. The electricians and the machine, it had to go. I mean, it was 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They shut down at lunch. For us, that was right at 4 o'clock in the morning. And that's when we'd come aboard and we'd check all the brushes and take care of stuff. If there was any lights and stuff that needed to be changed. The rest of the time we was doing field work, cable repair work, things like that. There was never a dull moment. The winter was really bad. I mean, it didn't matter if it was 20 below zero. You was out there. If this thing needed a cable change, you got a cable change, and then you took care of all the collateral. You had to pick the cable up, put it back on the machine. But I remember spending a lot of time right in here because we'd come up about a half hour before they'd shut down and get things set up. And there was a desk right there, and there wasn't any chairs. There was a stool, and if you was here, you sat on the floor. You worked in the mud. You didn't even think anything about it. You just, if it was over there, you didn't walk around the mud puddle. You went through it. But every now and then on third shift, we'd have to take the power wagon into the truck shop, get it close to the stove to thaw out all the mud around the pedals, because it was manual shift and it got so thick, you couldn't push the brake or clutch all the way down, and we'd chip it out of there. And sometimes we'd be in the Tipple, we'd have dinner, I guess you'd call it, if you wanted to be breakfast for most people. But in the shops, in the warehouse with the warehouse man. They had a guy on third shift there too, but I think they had about 100 people working out here. Each group, the welders was responsible for, the cracks and fixing stuff here. You had machinists back in the tipple area. You had car droppers in the tipple area. You had the guy that dumped the trucks. He was there to make sure the area was clean so they wouldn't slip off in the. But then you had the main office was back. It was probably about 10, 12 miles from here. The haul trucks, 100-ton trucks, they'd take the coal from here into there. It was really an operation, and it went on for a lot of years. P&M was a big producer. They were later bought out by Gulf Oil Corporation, and later the big mergers in the oil companies, they merged with Chevron, and Chevron really wasn't interested in the mining business, but this thing slowly wore out and contracts run out. Coal was king. I mean, it was all our electricity, everything we relied on it. In this particular area, I think we were digging 2 or 3 seams. The top seam, I think, was a Kroberg. It wasn't very good. We didn't dig it very often, but it was thin. The next thing down was the Fleming, and the predominant seam was the mineral seam, and it was 18 to 20, 30 inches thick. This machine was run by 3 people. You had an operator who sat in here. You had an oiler who was responsible for all the greasing systems on this machine, changing the oil barrels and stuff like that. And the ground man, he was responsible for moving the machine up and keeping it where it needed to be in the pit, and to keep the coal face clean, keep shoving all the stuff. He had a little loader down there that he did that with, and depending on how deep we was digging, he'd move up every 15 to 30 minutes, move the machine, 30 feet, and start it all over again. And the operator, he just sat in there and just kept it digging. One of the axles on one of those big pulleys up there, those are about 18 feet across. That axle broke, and that pulley and all that cable was laying out there on the coal. It was a mess. I mean, but they had Belger Cartage out of Kansas City. They had the big cranes, and they was here. They had this thing back in operation in less than a week. But there was a lot of things that could go wrong on here. Generators, motors, your propels. Each one of those big tracks down there had its own separate gear case and motor. And it was a lot of maintenance all over the place. The tipple electrician, he had a lot to do in there because they had all the pumps and the main drag and belts and lights and everything else. But we would work in there occasionally, but not very often. Our job was mainly out here in the field with the machines and making sure power was on it. Miners' holiday was the last of June, the 1st of July, and it shut down for 2 weeks for maintenance and cleaning. That circle rail that this thing swivels on, that's got all automatic greasers, and it'll grease whether it needs it or not, every 15, whatever it was set on. But that would accumulate under there, and they'd literally have men go under there. The machine wasn't running anymore, with 5-gallon buckets and scrapers, and scrape all that grease up and throw it out there's a hole back here where you could just drop it down on the coal. It was a real good job. I felt privileged to work here, work with a great group of people. Never had any trouble with anybody.